Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Hayden. I'm President of Restore America's Estuaries. Welcome to this Congressional Estuary Caucus event. Very much appreciate you joining us today. Today's topic is nature as infrastructure, protecting our coasts, bringing jobs to our communities, and restoring nature and natural ecosystems. I think as we think about infrastructure today, it's an important thing to highlight that over 40% of Americans live along estuaries, and over 40% of the US economy is dependent and related to estuaries. So really, the health of our estuaries is directly and walks hand in hand with the health of the American people and the American economy. So we're really looking forward to delving into this topic today of nature as infrastructure. Before we do that, I'd like to recognize the chairs of the Congressional Estuary Caucus for supporting this event and helping us bring this together. We have Representative Susan Bonamici, Democrat from Oregon, Representative Rick Larson, Democrat from Washington State, Representative Bill Posey, Republican from Florida, and Representative Brian Mast, Republican from Florida. And I'd also very much appreciate the support of their staff in helping us organize these events and bringing everyone together today. A bit of housekeeping before we go. We'll have 4 presenters. The event is recorded and we'll make both the presentations and the recording available after the event. We'll go through presentations for about 15 minutes, and then after that, hand over the time to questions and answers. You know, if you want, we schedule this for about 30 minutes, but if you want to stay longer and there's more questions, we'll stay for as long as there's questions. With that, I'd like to go forward and introduce our 4 presenters. We're very happy to have John Floberg from NOAA's Office of Habitat Conservation and NOAA Fisheries. We have Duane De Freese, who's the Executive Director of the Indian River Lagoon Council and Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Partnership. Brandon Puckett, a Board Member and Research Coordinator at the North Carolina Coastal Reserve and National Estuarine Research Reserve. And then Alicia Lehrer, Executive Director, I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council in Rhode Island. So these are our 4 panelists. We'll go through the presentations again for about 15 minutes and then go on to questions and answers. With that introduction, I'd like to hand it over to John.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks everyone for being here and for inviting NOAA to present today. I'm John Floberg with the NOAA Restoration Center, and we're located within the Office of Habitat Conservation in NOAA Fisheries. I'm located in Washington State. Now, NOAA's Restoration Center implements large-scale habitat restoration projects throughout the nation. We do this through several different programs and funding mechanisms. Through our community-based restoration program, we provide funding and technical assistance to support community-led efforts to restore habitat to NOAA Trust resources, including Pacific salmon, which I'll cover today. Next slide. Now I'm excited to show you how the Smith Island wetland restoration exemplifies nature-based infrastructure with multiple benefits to fish and human communities. In this project, we help restore over 300 acres of tidal marsh at Smith Island to create these benefits, including both healthier salmon runs and flood protection for adjacent communities. Here also on the bottom of the slide, you can see our key tribal and governmental partners. We frequently work with many partners to accomplish such big projects. And finally, in the photo, see how the Cascade Mountains tower over the city of Everett. That's a lot of stored water that flows down and can threaten communities in the floodplain. Next slide. Now in this Google Earth view, you can see Washington State and Seattle, and note the snowy white peaks that flow rivers down to Puget Sound. Let's zoom to Everett's Snohomish watershed and see the north and the south forks of the Snohomish River flowing west to the city of Everett. We're going to zoom down and see that whole watershed of the Snohomish going into Everett, which is a city just a half-hour drive north from Seattle. Now let's zoom into Everett and show the Smith Island site itself just 2 miles east of downtown in the Snohomish Estuary. And we'll outline the site, the Smith Island site, in orange. And as we zoom, let's use Google Earth to go back in time to 2015 pre-restoration. Now you can see as we zoom in, it's largely dry within this site boundary as former agricultural land that's been diked since the 1930s. Now remember, we wanted to return this land back to tidal wetlands for salmon habitat. And now let's show the dike in blue that was keeping it dry for all those years. The basic restoration is simple. Build a new dike in red, set back from the blue dike, punch holes in the blue dike, and just let the water in. Now let's swing around clockwise to the site of the main dike breach to a 20/20 view, showing the water that flowed in and now provides an average of 250,000 young salmon a chance to grow big at Smith Island each year before going out to the ocean. And now let's swing around clockwise to show the flooded site next to the city of Everett that now holds a big amount of that flow and energy from the Cascades, 1,200 acre-feet of flood protection. And as we continue clockwise, we also have the direct benefit of the new setback dike protecting I-5 and adjacent development from flood damage. NOAA has supported many projects just like this one that restore salmon habitat while protecting communities from flooding and the effects of extreme weather and climate change all over Puget Sound and up and down the West Coast. And we look forward to continuing to test and refine these nature-based infrastructure techniques throughout the nation in the future. Thanks for your time.
Hi, this is Duane De Freese. I'm the Executive Director of the IRL Council and Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. First, I want to thank the Caucus co-chairs and the Caucus membership for support of our nation estuaries and also for the National Estuary Program. Thought it might be best to start with a high-level view of the lagoon so I can put the project I want to highlight into a context. Indian River Lagoon encompasses about 40% of the east coast of Florida. It's narrow, it's shallow, it's poorly flushed, and therefore it's very susceptible to all sorts of impacts, including freshwater pollutants and especially nutrients. And as a result, we have been since 2011 seeing recurring harmful algal blooms. In the picture on the left, you see a brown tide bloom that has been recurring seasonally. Center, a marine cyanobacterial bloom that dominated most of the end of the summer and last fall. And then on the right side, the southern lagoon, where we see microcystis cyanobacteria that can be toxic. And in fact, this last year, we are currently under an unusual mortality event because these blooms are impacting seagrasses with dramatic losses of forage for manatees. And as of this week, the state of Florida had over 800 manatee deaths. But the root of the cause of all this is really infrastructure. It's aging inadequate stormwater and wastewater and septic systems that are driving primarily nutrients into the system that fuel these blooms. And so I want to move to the next slide. You know, it was challenged at first to think about what project to pick because last year alone we had over 160 projects in the lagoon, all ongoing simultaneously. 33 of those were partially funded by the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. And you can see highlights of these on our website at onelagoon.org. But I picked the McCarty Ranch Extension Project for a couple reasons. First and foremost, it's locally driven. So it's been driven by a city. It is a big project that has tremendous benefits. And so I'll go through it very quickly. Property is a 3,100 acre tract of land that was purchased by the city of the Port St. Lucie almost a decade ago. And the phased extension that you see on the bottom of the picture, just above the C23 canal, is a combination of stormwater projects that together will provide 8.9 billion gallons of storage for both rainwater and water coming out of that C23 canal. The C23 delivers not just freshwater pulses to the St. Lucie River, then the St. Lucie Estuary, and then the Indian River Lagoon, but also pollutant loads, sediment loads, and particularly really high nutrients. So it's a great example of how you can couple natural areas and then human-built activities that actually mimic nature to really build back the functionality of a watershed. It's also a great example of a project that's being driven by a local community, but wouldn't exist without federal, state, and local funding. So the benefits are many, and quickly, it reduces nutrients and at a very high level. And you can see the numbers here, over 71,000 pounds of nitrogen and 17,000 pounds of phosphorus each year. It reduces vulnerability to harmful algal blooms, provides habitat for wildlife and recreational opportunities for people, recharges groundwater, reduces risks of flooding, provides a future alternative water source for the city of Port St. Lucie. So they're already looking at this project with their population growth as a source of water. So I'll finish with this. The economy that the Indian River Lagoon contributes to is about 7.6 billion annually. And two independent studies back in 2016 showed that for every dollar invested, between $20 and $33 of value are returned. So when we think of a large natural infrastructure project like this, this just makes good common sense, good environmental sense, and a good business sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Duane. I'll hand it over to Brandon. And Brandon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I'll echo the sentiments of my fellow panelists and just thank the Congressional Estuary Caucus and the co-chairs for convening this briefing. I'm certainly very grateful to be here to speak with you today about some of the living shorelines related research that I've been involved with while research coordinator at the North Carolina National Estuarine Research Reserve, which, as shown by the map on this slide, sits within a national network of 29 reserves, indicated by the blue dots on the map, where, among other things, scientists and educators strive to work hand in hand with communities to enhance coastal resilience. And as my title suggests, in the next couple slides, I'm going to try to summarize some ways in which living shorelines enhance both community and ecosystem resilience. Next slide. So real briefly, what are living shorelines? Living shorelines intentionally harness nature as infrastructure to stabilize estuarine shorelines and enhance habitats. To do so, oftentimes natural elements such as vegetation and oyster reefs are used where possible, as illustrated by the first two pictures panels going from left to right. Also, where necessary, structural materials such as rock is used, as illustrated by the third panel there. And in the far right, the fourth panel, vertical walls such as bulkheads, they're not considered living shorelines. Bulkheads do tend to be the most used shoreline stabilization approach and are perceived by many property owners, in fact, to be more durable and effective at shoreline protection than our living shorelines. Next slide, please. So we in North Carolina, we've used hurricanes and their associated impacts to test the assumption as to whether bulkheads essentially increase community resilience. So what I've shown here is a couple photos of two neighboring properties. The top photo is a property with a bulkhead, and the bottom photo is a property with a marsh sill living shoreline. And both of these photos were taken just before a hurricane. And just for orientation, note the location of those red arrows there. Next, please. And this is the resulting photo just after the hurricane. So if we look at the top right there, the bulkhead was essentially destroyed during the hurricane, requiring fairly extensive and costly repair. And in contrast, along the bottom right, the living shoreline was highly resilient to storm impacts, emerging largely undamaged and unchanged. And so the data we've collected bears out sort of what this photo montage illustrates, in that over the course of multiple hurricanes, the reported cost to repair bulkhead damage have been over double that of living shorelines. Next slide, please. Living shorelines can also enhance ecosystem resilience. For instance, living shorelines such as sills, as pictured in that previous slide, can reduce the erosion of salt marshes, which are quite an important, albeit imperiled, habitat. Our research suggests that relative to marshes that are stabilized by sills, the erosion rates are on average 110% and 360% higher at marshes without sills and marshes adjacent to bulkheads, respectively. Next, please. Moreover, the long-term persistence of marshes is really dependent on their ability to build elevation at rates that are equal to or exceeding sea level rise. And we know from tools such as surface elevation tables, which is pictured here, that marshes fringed by things like oyster reefs or protected by sills are much better able to keep pace with sea level rise. So to conclude, living shorelines may offer a rare win-win option that benefit both our local, our coastal communities and ecosystems. And while there's certainly not a solution everywhere or for all coastal hazards, the emerging science suggests that they certainly deserve a place in the coastal infrastructure portfolio. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandon. I'll now hand it over to Alicia.
Thank you very much. Hi, I also want to thank the Congressional Estuary Caucus for inviting us to talk about these projects today. I'm going to be talking about the Woonasquatucket River Watershed, which is a small urban watershed running through Providence, Rhode Island, and that's a direct feeder to Narragansett Bay on the Atlantic coast. And the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, which is the organization I work for, has built and maintains a 7-mile greenway next to the river, which is a network of parks and multi-use trails for recreation and transportation. Our project uses the greenway as an opportunity to use nature-based green infrastructure solutions to clean polluted stormwater going into the river, provide flood resilience, and engage the community. Next slide, please. This watershed is very subject to flooding, and you can see these pictures here show a flood that we had in 2010. This is the Providence neighborhood of Olneyville, which is the most vulnerable neighborhood in the city of Providence for flooding events. And we're just embarking on a flood resilience project with our partners at the Natural Resources Conservation Service that will look at the entire watershed to determine how we can mitigate flooding. But I also wanted to include a little picture on the bottom right here of a community engagement strategy that we've just begun called New Voices at the Water Table, and that engages the frontline residents that live in this community to build their capacity and understanding of the issues and their leadership skills so that they can participate in determining what plans are going to be happening and direct resources in their environment. Next slide, please. Our pilot program for greening the Woonasquatucket River Greenway was a parking lot retrofit. And we did this in that neighborhood of Olneyville. We worked with a local bank that was right in the middle of the downtown area of that neighborhood, where we removed the pavement on a section of the parking lot, built a walkway right from the downtown to the river, to the bike path and the greenway right there, as well as a big, nice nature-based solution. And we add signage every time we put in one of these projects so that the community understands why they're going in and how it benefits the community. Since 2018, when we completed this project, we've completed 4 more projects like this along the Greenway. There's 4 more in design. We have 15 prioritized, and so far these projects treat and capture 2,356 gallons of stormwater for every inch of rain. Next slide, please. Finally, we're working on a new section of our greenway. And this is the part that goes right into downtown Providence. And it's 1 mile of greenway. And while we're building in a bike path that's separated from the cars in this stretch and adding pocket parks and bringing people close to the river, we are prioritizing $2.5 million of that project to add this type of green infrastructure all along the greenway, so that not only are we creating a new way for people to connect to the river and build stewardship for the estuary, we are also building in flood resilience and cleaner water. And that's kind of all I wanted to share with you today. We're really thrilled to be working with all of you on these measures that build resilience into our communities.
Great. Well, thank you very much for those presentations. Just want to also, we'll go now to questions and answers. I'm starting to see some Q&A in the Q&A chat box as well as in the chat forums. Rob, I think we'll be able to sort of actually zoom in on actual individual speakers, so you can ask your questions directly if you would like. Before we hand it back into Q&A, I would like to recognize the support of the Association of National Estuary Programs and then also the National Estuarine Research Reserve Association in helping us put this together. And also that, you know, if you've enjoyed this event and you think your congressional representative would be interested in joining the Estuary Caucus, please reach out to the Estuary Caucus chairs and learn more about the caucus. And certainly we'd be happy to work with you and develop future events.